I didn't believe anything could actually happen in a cemetery. Not really. Not in the way people describe it. And that's exactly why I decided to stay there overnight. Because I thought fear was just something people created in their own minds. Something that disappears the moment you face it directly. But I was wrong. And I realized that long before the night was over. Long before I even understood what I had gotten myself into. It started as a simple idea. Almost stupid in hindsight. Something I mentioned casually to a friend after hearing a story about an old cemetery just outside town, a place people avoided after dark, not because of any official reason, but because of stories that had been passed around for years. Quiet stories, the kind people tell but don't really explain. The cemetery itself sat beyond a narrow road surrounded by trees, far enough from the main highway that you couldn't hear cars once you stepped inside. Just the wind moving through branches and the occasional distant sound that felt too far away to matter. I went there just before sunset, carrying a small backpack, a flashlight, and my phone, thinking I'd sit there for a few hours, prove to myself there was nothing to be afraid of, and leave before it got too late. But something about the place made me stay longer than I planned. At first, everything felt normal, almost disappointingly quiet, the kind of stillness you'd expect from any empty place. The gravestones were old, some leaning slightly, others cracked, their surfaces worn down by time until the names were barely readable. There were no lights, no buildings nearby, just rows of stones fading into darkness as the sun disappeared. I found a spot near the center where the ground was relatively flat and sat down, leaning against a larger headstone that felt cold even through my jacket. As the sky darkened, the temperature dropped more than I expected, and the air took on that damp, heavy feeling that seems to settle into your chest when you breathe too deeply. I checked my phone a few times, more out of habit than anything else, watching the time move slowly, convincing myself that the uneasiness I felt was just anticipation, nothing more. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it became once it was fully dark. Not just the absence of sound, but a kind of silence that felt unnatural, like something was missing. Even the wind seemed to fade, leaving the trees completely still, their outlines barely visible against the sky. I remember shifting slightly, trying to get comfortable, when I heard it. A faint sound behind me, like a footstep on dry leaves. I turned immediately, shining my flashlight across the ground, but there was nothing there, just uneven dirt and scattered debris. I told myself it was an animal, maybe something small moving through the area, but the sound didn't repeat, and that made it feel stranger, like it had only happened once, just enough to be noticed. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my phone again, scrolling without really seeing anything, but the feeling had changed. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, like something was present even if I couldn't see it. A few minutes later, I heard it again, this time to my left, the same soft crunch, slow and deliberate. I turned the light in that direction, sweeping it across the ground, the stones, the shadows between them, but again, nothing. My chest tightened slightly, not out of panic, but out of confusion, because the sound had been too clear, too close to dismiss entirely. I stood up then, brushing dirt from my clothes, telling myself I should probably leave soon, but I didn't move toward the exit, not yet, because part of me still wanted to understand what was happening. As I walked a few steps forward, I became aware of something else, something subtle at first, the feeling that my movement wasn't the only one in that space. I would take a step, and the second later I thought I heard another, slightly out of sync, just behind me. I stopped, and the sound stopped too. I waited, holding my breath, listening carefully, but the silence returned, thick and heavy. I started walking again, slower this time, and again, after a moment, there it was, a second step, faint but distinct, matching my pace just enough to make me question it.
I turned quickly, shining the light behind me, but there was nothing, just the same rows of stones stretching into darkness. At that point, I told myself it was my own footsteps echoing somehow, even though that didn't make sense in an open space, and I forced myself to keep moving. I don't know exactly when the fear started to feel real, but it was sometime after that, when I realized I couldn't remember the path I had taken to get in. The cemetery looked different at night, the layout more confusing, the rows of gravestones blending together in a way that made it hard to tell one direction from another. I tried to orient myself, looking for the entrance, but every direction looked the same, dark shapes and narrow gaps between them. I checked my phone again, hoping to use it for navigation, but the signal was weak, almost non-existent, and the screen felt too bright against the darkness, making it harder to see anything beyond its glow. That's when I heard it again, closer this time, unmistakably behind me, a single step, then another, slow and measured. I didn't turn right away because something in me didn't want to confirm it, didn't want to see whatever might be there. Instead, I started walking faster, my breathing becoming uneven, my grip tightening on the flashlight. The steps followed, not rushing, not matching my speed exactly, but staying just close enough that I could hear them. I could feel it then, that sense of being watched, not from a distance, but from somewhere very near, just outside my field of vision. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I stopped abruptly and turned, swinging the light in a wide arc behind me. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something, a shape that didn't belong, standing between two gravestones, too still, too dark to be just a shadow. But before I could focus on it, it was gone. Or maybe it had never been there at all. My heart was pounding now, loud enough that it almost drowned out everything else, and I realized I needed to leave immediately, without trying to understand anything further. I started moving quickly, almost running now, choosing a direction at random, hoping it would lead me back to the entrance. The ground felt uneven beneath my feet, and more than once I nearly tripped over something I couldn't see in time. The flashlight beam shook with my movement, casting shifting shadows that seemed to move on their own, creating shapes that looked almost human for a split second before disappearing. And then I heard it again. Not just footsteps now, but something heavier, something dragging slightly, keeping pace with me from somewhere behind. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I kept moving, faster and faster, until I finally saw it, the outline of the entrance gate, faint but visible against the darkness. Relief hit me instantly, but it didn't last, because as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The gate was closed. I was sure it had been open when I came in, but now it stood shut, the metal bars casting long shadows across the ground. I reached it quickly, grabbing the handle, pushing hard, but it didn't move. Panic set in then, real panic, sharp and overwhelming, as I pulled at it again, harder this time, feeling the cold metal under my hands. Behind me, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse than anything I had heard before, complete and absolute, like everything had paused at once. I stood there, my back to the gate, my chest rising and falling rapidly, and slowly, against my better judgment, I turned my head just slightly, just enough to see past my shoulder. At first, I saw nothing, just darkness and the faint shapes of gravestones. But then, further back, between the rows, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing there, completely still, facing me, too far to make out clearly, but close enough that I knew it was there. I didn't wait. I turned back and forced the gate open with everything I had, the metal finally giving way with a loud scraping sound. I stumbled out onto the road, not stopping, not looking back, just moving as far away from that place as I could. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys, my mind replaying that moment over and over again. The next morning, I went back, not alone this time, bringing someone with me, needing to prove to myself that what I had experienced had some kind of explanation. The gate was open, just like I remembered it being before the night. The path was clear, easy to follow in daylight, nothing like the confusing layout I had struggled with in the dark. We walked through the cemetery together, and everything looked normal, quiet, empty. But then I saw something that I hadn't noticed before. Near the center, close to where I had been sitting, there was a gravestone that looked newer than the others, its surface clean, the name clearly visible. I moved closer without thinking, my stomach tightening as I read it, because the date carved beneath the name was recent, only a few days old. And just below that, in smaller text, was something that made everything feel wrong in a way I couldn't explain. A detail that I know I hadn't imagined, because it was still there when I stepped back and looked again. The inscription described the person buried there as someone who had been found wandering at night, disoriented, unable to explain how they had ended up in that place. I didn't say anything after that. I just turned and walked back to the entrance, the daylight no longer feeling safe the way it should have. And even now, when I think about that night, about the footsteps, the figure, the closed gate, I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being followed, but that something in that cemetery had been waiting for someone to stay long enough to notice it, long enough to become part of it.
I remember the first night I realized something was wrong, because it didn't feel like fear at first. It felt like confusion, like my brain was trying to understand something it wasn't ready to accept. I had only been working at the morgue for 3 weeks, night shifts mostly, because no one else wanted them, and I needed the money more than I cared about the hours. The building itself sat on the edge of the city, far enough that traffic noise faded into a dull hum, surrounded by an empty parking lot and a line of dead trees that barely moved even when the wind picked up. Most nights were quiet, almost painfully quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start noticing your own breathing too much. I got used to that part quickly. The paperwork, the cold air, the hum of the refrigeration units, the way everything smelled faintly metallic and sterile at the same time. What I didn't get used to was the feeling that started creeping in during my 3rd week, the sense that I wasn't as alone as I was supposed to be. It began small, the kind of thing you brush off without thinking too much about it. I would hear something faint like a soft tap or a distant scrape, and I'd pause, listening carefully, only to realize there was nothing there. The building was old, so I told myself it was just pipes or the cooling system adjusting, or maybe even my own footsteps echoing in ways I didn't understand yet. But then it started happening more often, and always at the same time, sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning, when the outside world felt the furthest away. I would be sitting at the desk, going through reports, and suddenly I would feel it, that strange shift in the air, like the silence had changed somehow, like it was heavier, more focused. And then I would hear it again, a soft, deliberate sound, not random, not mechanical, but something that felt almost intentional. One night, I decided to check. I told myself it was stupid not to, that I worked there, that it was my responsibility to make sure everything was in order. The hallway leading to the storage rooms was long and narrow, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed just enough to make the silence feel uneven. As I walked, my footsteps sounded louder than usual, echoing off the tiled floor, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I couldn't hear anything else. No hum, no distant noise, just my own movement. When I reached the first storage door, I hesitated for a second, not because I was scared, but because something about the stillness felt wrong, like I was interrupting something. I opened the door anyway. Inside, everything looked normal. The metal drawers were closed, the room was cold, and there was nothing out of place. I stood there longer than I needed to, scanning every corner, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Eventually, I closed the door and walked back, telling myself it was nothing. But it didn't stop. The sounds came back the next night and the night after that, always subtle, always just enough to make me stop what I was doing. And then I started noticing something else, something I couldn't explain as easily. Small things were out of place. A clipboard I left on the desk would be slightly angled differently when I returned. A drawer that I was sure I had fully closed would be just barely open, not enough to be obvious, but enough that I noticed. At first, I blamed myself, thinking maybe I was just tired, maybe I wasn't paying attention. But the more it happened, the less that explanation made sense. I started double-checking everything, making sure I remembered exactly where I left things, even marking positions in my mind, just to be sure. And still, things kept changing. The night everything shifted was colder than usual. I remember because I had to adjust the thermostat twice, even though it was already set low. Around 2:30, the building felt different, quieter than it had ever been, like the air itself was holding its breath. I was sitting at the desk when I heard it again, but this time it was clearer. A slow, dragging sound, like something heavy moving across the floor. It wasn't distant either. It sounded close, somewhere down the hallway. My first thought was that someone had entered the building, maybe another staff member or security, but I hadn't heard any doors open, no footsteps, nothing. I stood up slowly, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit, and stepped into the hallway. The lights seemed dimmer, even though they hadn't changed. As I moved forward, the sound stopped. Not faded, not moved, just stopped, like it had never been there. I stood still, listening, waiting for it to start again, but the silence pressed in harder, almost uncomfortable. I reached the storage room door again, the same one I had checked before, and this time I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The door was slightly open. I was certain I had closed it earlier. I told myself it could have been the air pressure, or maybe I hadn't shut it properly, but that explanation didn't sit right. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The cold hit me first, sharper than usual, like stepping into a freezer that had been left open too long. The room looked the same at a glance, but something felt off. I couldn't explain it right away, but I knew it. I stepped inside, my eyes moving across the rows of metal drawers, counting them without realizing it, like I was checking for something missing. That's when I saw it. One of the drawers, near the back, wasn't fully closed. It was only open by a few inches, just enough to notice if you were looking for it. I froze, trying to remember if I had checked that drawer earlier, trying to convince myself there was a reason for it, but I knew there wasn't. I moved closer, each step slower than the last, the sound of my shoes against the floor too loud in the silence. As I reached out to push the drawer closed, I hesitated. Something about the gap, the darkness inside, felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to see what was in there. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that this was my job, that there was nothing unusual about any of this. So I pushed the drawer. It didn't move. At first, I thought it was stuck. Maybe something had jammed the track. I applied a little more pressure, expecting it to slide shut, but it resisted, like something inside was pushing back. That's when I felt it, not physically, but something close to it, a presence, a pressure in the air, like standing too close to someone without seeing them. My chest tightened, and for the first time since I started working there, I felt real fear. I stepped back, my mind racing, trying to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. Then, slowly, the drawer moved, not because I pushed it,
but on its own, inching open just slightly more. I stumbled back, my breath catching, my eyes locked on that narrow gap. I didn't see anything at first, just darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was looking back at me. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe seconds, maybe longer, but eventually I forced myself to move, to turn, to get out of that room. I didn't run, not at first, but my steps were fast, uneven, my focus on reaching the hallway, on putting distance between me and whatever that was. As I stepped out, I heard it again, that dragging sound, but this time it was behind me, inside the room I had just left. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I walked faster, then faster still, until I reached the main area, my hands shaking as I grabbed my things. The building felt different now, not just quiet, but aware, like it had been watching the entire time. I left without finishing my shift, without turning off the lights, without locking the door behind me. The next day, I went back with another staff member, trying to convince myself that everything would look normal in daylight, that I had overreacted. We checked the storage room together. All the drawers were closed. Everything was exactly where it should have been. He asked me if I was sure I had seen anything at all, and I told him I didn't know anymore. I quit that same week. I told him it was the hours, the stress, anything that sounded reasonable. But the truth is, I still think about that moment, about the way that drawer moved, about the feeling that something was there, something that didn't belong. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I catch myself listening, expecting to hear that same slow, dragging sound, like something is still moving, still waiting, just out of sight.
I should have left when I realized the building wasn't as empty as it looked. But by then, it was already too late to pretend I hadn't noticed the signs, too late to convince myself that everything inside that abandoned asylum could be explained by broken walls and old memories. I went there just before sunset, driving down a narrow road that barely showed up on maps, surrounded by overgrown trees and rusted fences that leaned inward as if trying to close the path behind me. The place had been shut down for years, officially due to structural issues, but the stories about it never really stopped. Quiet rumors about patients who were never properly discharged, about staff who left suddenly without explanation, about nights when lights were seen flickering inside, even though the building had no power. I didn't believe any of that, not really, and that's exactly why I wanted to spend a full night there, alone, to prove that fear only exists when you allow it to. The asylum stood at the end of the road, larger than I expected, its windows dark and empty, many of them broken, giving the impression that the building was watching from the inside rather than the outside. I parked a short distance away, grabbing my flashlight and a small bag with some basic supplies, telling myself I would stay until morning no matter what. The air felt colder near the building, even though the evening hadn't fully set in yet. And as I stepped closer, I noticed how quiet everything was, not just around the structure, but in the surrounding woods as well. There were no insects, no distant animal sounds, just a heavy stillness that seemed to settle into the ground itself. I pushed open the main entrance door with some effort, the hinges groaning loudly, the sound echoing deeper inside, as if the building carried it further than it should have. Inside, the smell hit me first, a mix of dust, damp walls, and something older that I couldn't quite place, something that felt out of time. The hallway stretched ahead, long and dim, the light from the entrance barely reaching the corners. I turned on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, revealing peeling paint, scattered debris, and doors that hung slightly open as if someone had passed through them not long ago. I walked slowly,
my footsteps echoing off the tiled floor, each step sounding louder than it should have, making it difficult to tell if there was any other movement besides my own. At first, everything felt exactly as I expected, abandoned, silent, nothing more than an old building left to decay.
But then I started noticing small things that didn't fit that idea. A chair in one of the rooms was angled toward the doorway, not pushed aside like everything else, but positioned as if someone had been sitting there recently. A clipboard lay on the floor nearby, not covered in dust like the rest of the objects, its surface strangely clean compared to everything around it. I told myself it could have been recent visitors, other people exploring the place, but the deeper I went, the less that explanation made sense. The dust on the floors was thick enough that every step left a clear mark, and yet in some areas there were no footprints at all, not even mine, as if the ground had been undisturbed for years, despite the objects that looked recently moved. As the light outside faded completely, the building seemed to change. The darkness inside grew heavier, absorbing the beam of my flashlight rather than reflecting it, making it feel like I could only see a few feet ahead at any time. The silence became more noticeable, pressing against my ears until even the smallest sound felt amplified. That was when I heard the first noise that I couldn't ignore. A faint metallic clink somewhere deeper in the building, followed by what sounded like a slow dragging movement across the floor. I stopped immediately, holding my breath, trying to pinpoint where it came from, but the sound didn't repeat. I stood there for several seconds, listening, waiting for something else, but nothing came. I told myself it was the building settling, old materials shifting as temperatures changed, a reasonable explanation that didn't require anything else. Still, I found myself moving more carefully after that, turning corners slower, checking rooms more thoroughly before stepping inside. The further I went, the more the layout began to feel unfamiliar, even though I hadn't taken that many turns. Hallways seemed longer than they should have been. Doors appeared in places I didn't remember seeing before, and at one point I could have sworn I passed the same broken window twice, even though I had been moving in a straight line. Eventually, I reached what looked like an old patient ward, a larger room filled with metal bed frames, most of them rusted, some tipped over. I stepped inside, sweeping the flashlight across the space, noticing how the beds were arranged unevenly, some closer together, others pushed far apart, as if moved without any clear pattern. I set my bag down near the entrance, deciding this would be where I stayed for the night, at least for a while. It felt more open than the hallways, less confined, and I told myself if anything made me uncomfortable, I could leave quickly from there. I sat on one of the beds, the metal frame creaking softly under my weight, and for a moment, everything seemed calm again. The silence returned to that heavy, unmoving state, and I started to feel slightly foolish for being on edge earlier. I checked my phone, noticing there was no signal, something I had expected, but still found unsettling. As I looked up again, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness beyond the flashlight beam, I noticed something that made me pause. One of the beds across the room looked different from the others. Not because of its condition, but because of its position. It was angled slightly toward me, as if it had been turned recently.
I didn't remember seeing it like that when I first entered. I stood up slowly, my attention fixed on that bed, trying to recall if I had missed it earlier. I took a few steps closer, the sound of my movement echoing again, and as I did, I heard something behind me, a soft, almost imperceptible shift, like fabric brushing against metal. I turned quickly, shining the flashlight back toward where I had been sitting, but everything looked the same. The bed I had been on was empty, exactly as I left it. I stayed still, waiting, listening, but the silence returned, thicker than before. That was when I started to feel it, that same sensation I had read about but never truly understood, the feeling that I was not alone. It wasn't something I could see or hear clearly, but it was there, a presence just beyond my perception, close enough that I couldn't ignore it. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination reacting to the environment, but the feeling didn't fade. Instead, it grew stronger. I picked up my bag, deciding I should leave the room and maybe head back toward the entrance just to get some air, to reset my thoughts. As I stepped into the hallway again, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten immediately. The footprints I had left earlier were gone. The dust on the floor looked untouched, smooth and undisturbed, as if I had never walked there at all. I stared at the ground for a moment, trying to understand how that was possible, but there was no explanation that made sense. Then I heard it again. This time it was unmistakable, a slow, deliberate step somewhere behind me. I didn't turn right away. My body felt tense, my breathing shallow as I listened for another sound. After a few seconds, it came again. Another step, slightly closer. I turned then, the flashlight beam shaking as I swung it around, but the hallway was empty, stretching into darkness with no movement, no visible source for the sound.
I started walking, faster now, my focus on reaching the entrance, on getting out of the building as quickly as possible. But the more I moved, the more it felt like the distance wasn't changing, like the hallway was extending ahead of me, refusing to end. Behind me, the footsteps continued, steady and unhurried, never rushing, never stopping. I realized then that whatever was following me didn't need to catch up. It was already close enough. I broke into a run, my footsteps echoing loudly, the beam of the flashlight bouncing wildly, casting shadows that twisted and stretched along the walls. The sound behind me changed, no longer just footsteps, but something heavier, something dragging slightly, matching my speed now, staying just out of sight. At some point, I saw a doorway to my right and turned into it without thinking, slamming into the room and pushing the door closed behind me. The silence that followed was immediate and overwhelming. I stood there, my back against the door, listening, waiting for the sound to return, but nothing came. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then I noticed the door handle. It moved slightly. Not enough to open, just a small, deliberate shift, as if something on the other side had tested it. My breath caught, my eyes fixed on that handle as it moved again, slowly, almost carefully. I didn't wait. I turned away, looking for another exit, another way out of the room. But as I did, I saw something that made everything stop. Across the room, in the corner where the light barely reached, there was a figure. It wasn't moving. It wasn't doing anything at all. It was just standing there, facing me, its outline barely visible against the darkness, but clear enough that I knew it wasn't part of the room. I don't remember how long I stood there, frozen, unable to think, unable to move. And then, without warning, the flashlight flickered. Just once, but when it came back on, the figure was closer. I didn't try to understand it. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I moved, fast and without direction, pushing past everything, finding the door, forcing it open, and running back into the hallway. I don't know how I found the exit. I don't remember the path I took. All I know is that at some point I saw the faint outline of the entrance, the door hanging open just enough to let in a sliver of outside light. I ran toward it, not stopping until I was outside, the cold air hitting me hard as I stumbled forward. I didn't look back, not then, not when I reached my car, not even when I drove away. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet and still, I think about that building, about the way the hallway stretched, about the footprints disappearing, about the figure that moved without moving. And the part that still bothers me the most isn't what I saw. It's the feeling I had right before I left, the feeling that something inside that asylum wasn't trying to keep me there. It was letting me go.